It's about to go down with Marc and Cathey, a live coaching show about dropping ideas. Marc and Cathey coach and have conversations with brilliant idea creators who are reimagining the world through the expression of their words, thoughts, and action.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to It's About to Go Down. I am Cathey Armillas.
And I am Marc Williams, and we have a most awesome person with us today. This guy, I mean, his story is incredible. And the line of business that he does and how he got there, I just can't wait for you to hear this story. John McSherry is a real estate broker, a real estate investor, past president of the Young Professionals Network. This guy is international. He is international. And like I said, the story he's going to share with us today and the idea that he's going to share with us today, I believe is really going to blow everybody's mind. So, John, welcome to It's About to Go Down. Welcome to this opportunity to ask everybody this question. Are you using your pain to power your success? Are you using your pain to power your success? John, tell us about this idea, why it's so important to you, and why you want to share it with the world.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And, my story, the reason why I feel like it's important is because I found that after suffering on a very deep level, I was able to turn that suffering and pain into success. And the way that it happened was, and I'll just start from the beginning and try to make it quick, is at a very young age, my father passed away. I was only 21 years old, and it really put me into a deep, dark place. I was depressed. I was unhappy. I was actually just trying to not accept the fact that he passed away. So in my mind, I was just in a fantasy world, but I was in college and trying to finish my college degree. And I was also working in nightclubs. I loved music. I loved going out dancing, DJing, and partying. It was a good time, and it was a good way to make money, right? So hosting parties and bartending. But after a while, I found that I was partying more and more, drinking, having fun, going out, staying out late. And even though I was making good money and doing okay in school, the drinking progressively got worse. And in 2006, basically found myself homeless, broke, lost my license, and I had no other option. But I did have my aunt in New York, and I knew that she would help me out. And I was actually living in Philly at the time. And I knew she would help me out. So I reached out to my aunt. And at this point, I had no other option. And I said, Lisa, can I just come to New York? I only need 2 weeks to get back on my feet. And she welcomed me with open arms. Now, I just really wanted to be able to have a place to go because I had nowhere else to go. And pretty much continue doing what I was doing. But I knew that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And one way or another, I found myself into a 12-step program, whether it was her or my cousin. Eventually, they got me into that program because they knew that I needed help. And that program, at first, I didn't want to be there. I wanted to continue living the life I was living. But after a while, I heard someone tell my story. And when I heard my story, I went up to him afterwards and I said, how did you do what you did? Because he was sober, he was happy, he was living a great life. And he told me, he said, I want you to go home. I want you to do this prayer. It was the serenity prayer. And at that time I was angry with, God and spirituality, but he said, go home, pray, and keep coming to these meetings. So that's what I did. I went home, sat in the corner of that garage that I was living in at my aunt's house, and I prayed, and I felt something being removed from me. But I also knew that I had to continue doing the work to get sober, live a sober life, and to get the gifts of the program. So every day I would go to meetings, I was going to jails, I was going to rehab centers, and I was helping other alcoholics. And that was how I actually started to get better, because the more people I helped, the less I thought of my own stuff, right? It took all the attention off of depression, my father, all these things that I was dealing with. And it was just such an amazing, beautiful thing, right? The more people you help, the better you get. And instantly, I got a job in Manhattan working in design, which is what I went to school for. And I was incredibly grateful for that opportunity. But at the same time, I started to become obsessed with real estate because when I had free time, I would just watch HGTV. I had nothing else to do but to watch these shows. And being a designer, because I was in graphic design and product design, I became obsessed about this process of making something that was ugly into something beautiful again. It wasn't products or graphics, but it was actually, they were designing houses, renovating houses, and that became an obsession. So I lived in that garage for 5 years, obsessed about saving every penny to buy my first property, whether it was to flip it or just to live in. That became an obsession. So lived in that garage, saved every penny. I brought my lunch to work every day. I didn't go out. I didn't party. I didn't date. I didn't do anything but just focus on that one goal. And in 2011, I was able to buy that first property. I'll never forget the moment when I bought that first property, of just closing on it and just going into the bedroom and just, I remember sliding down the wall and just, I had my head down and I was crying, just tears of joy and disbelief that I was actually able to go from being homeless 5 years ago to now owning a property in New York. So I was just tremendously grateful for that.
Wow. Oh, so much in here already, John. What's really like wild about your story is, like, of course you're telling it like in a really fast version, but to imagine all of the little in-betweens on everything that you said, is what I was thinking. But you said something that I thought was an analogy to your idea. You were saying it about the real estate, but you said you because of your design background, your graphic design background, you were kind of obsessed with making something ugly become beautiful again. And I was like, oh, I don't know if you noticed that you said that like exactly like that, but you said it, and I thought it's probably the analogy for what happened to you yourself, So, and it wasn't that it's like, make it beautiful again, like some ugly things had piled on or something. So I don't know, Mark, you're like totally shaking your head. So did you really connect to that as well?
I love your brain, and this is why I love sharing this space with you, because I wrote down the same line, and that's exactly what I was going to talk about. And yes, I absolutely agree with you, and I'm already curious about beyond real estate, right? Because we're talking about lives here. Like, what is that process? Why is that process so important? And I agree. I love the emphasis on beautiful again.
Again, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Beautiful again.
Yeah.
Wow.
And John, how did you, by the way, beautiful background. I have to say, it's like the best background I think I've seen ever, maybe. Like, it's so beautiful. So I appreciate your attention to making things beautiful. What were some of the things that you feel like, if you have this idea, and I know you've shared your story with lots of people, and a lot of people really connect with it. If the story is taking your pain, and the idea is like taking your pain and doing something with it, what would you say were those moments? I know you said you kept going back to the meetings, but how did you really face your pain? Like, what were you doing to really kind of go face to face with it?
Well, actually, a big part of the program, right? It's 12 steps. And step 4 is where you actually make a list of all the people that you might have harmed or might have come in contact with. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, you make a full list, a full inventory of anyone that has entered your life and you might have some sort of feelings about, whether it's positive or negative. And then you go out and you make amends to every single person. So I went on this mission of making amends to every single person's life, even to the grave of my father that passed, and burying the letter that I wrote to him. And that was a way for me to make amends to him. Everyone from, my mother, my sister, everyone in my entire life. And everyone was like, John, you didn't do anything wrong. But for me, it was releasing me from that guilt and that shame or anything that I was holding on to, whether it's real or not. So that was a big transformative moment for me. And I also stopped my story right in the middle because I wanted to really just focus on this part for a moment. After this is when I really got into real estate head on and things really took off with success. But at this moment where, I got sober and got my first job and then bought my first property, that was early on. And that's when a lot of change actually happened, right? I went from being in complete despair when I was at that moment of just sitting on a park bench and thinking to myself, I just want to get a job and be respected. That is all I want at that moment. That was the limit of my goals. Like that was my belief system at that time. Now, other things happen in life and there was a lot of self-improvement and development, networking and building these relationships. But that in itself, I think a lot of people can identify with that feeling of despair and being hopeless. and being able to break through that, and being around that group of men and women. And there's also men's groups and other spiritual and Christian groups and groups of all faiths. But what I liked about the AA program was coming into the program, anybody from any background or faith or whatever is welcome. And it is a spiritual program, but it's not a religious program. So you can come in and have your own experience and be around a fellowship of people there to support you as you support other people. And that was a big part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I got two things on my head. So I'm going to ask this first one for now, only because Cathey so eloquently picked up on this part, and I want to dig a little bit deeper in it. How important is that phrase or that term, beautiful again? In terms of this process of turning pain to power, using your pain to power your success, how important is that understanding of beautiful again?
Well, what's really interesting is that I think as human beings, I think we're all beautiful, but I think it's the belief system that we're not is the problem, right? We were beautiful the entire time, but our belief systems and our ideas and our mindset is what needs to change, and to realize how we're beautiful. And I was able to see the beauty in all things, in all people, when I ended up getting sober and practice the principles of that program, right? Getting out, serving other people, helping other people, seeing things differently. And I was able to see the real beauty, like, for instance, like a sunrise, right? When I was struggling deep in that moment, the sun was like, oh my God, it's sunny out. Like, I just want to sleep. I just want to go back to bed, right? But when I was able to go through this transformative process, I was up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, enjoying the beautiful sunset, sitting with myself, right? Whether it's through meditation or prayer, and actually enjoying the moment, enjoying the sunset, enjoying the human experience, which was something I was unable to see when I was struggling.
Wow. Mark, I think you have another question, but I really like that too. The not like some of the things that are connecting for me, the unable to see, I like that, because I think it's part of also, finding the beautiful again, or discovering it, or, but the things that probably when we were in our worst state and when we're going through a lot of pain, I feel like that would be really important to do. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
John, you got to write down that phrase, finding the beautiful again. I like the way you said that, Cathey. Finding the beautiful again. Man, wow. All right, since you asked me to ask the second question, I'll ask the second question. I think it's in a different direction, but it's all tied together, right? Because it's all a brainchild of John's. You talked about a 12-step program. And I think what Cathey asked made me think of this. There was ultimately something beyond even those 12 steps. There was something even beyond each of the different groups that you were in, that got you to this point. Because John, let me tell you something. John is being humble right now. This man is absolutely on fire with all the amazing things that he does. And I've got to believe there's a lot of people who go through programs. There's a lot of people who have, people in their lives, people in their families who, will take them in when times are rough. But I'm wondering, what was that? And maybe I don't want to use the number 13, because 13 is often associated with bad luck, but I'll use it anyway, just because I'll be numerical. What was that 13th step that wasn't a part of any program that you took that turned things around?
I think building relationships with people in and out of the program, right? There's even relationships I built in that program that I'm still friends with today. And we're going back to 2006, where I've gone to work for them, and then they came to work for me later on in life. Relationships with my family, relationships with friends, past friends, all relatives, but also building business relationships, right? That's something that has been very impactful and important to my business, where no matter where I go, I'm always out talking to people, building relationships, true, authentic relationships. Just when I was in Palm Beach last week, I probably met a new 2 or 3 people every single day, but made authentic, real connections and real relationships. Because looking back at some of the biggest deals that I've ever done, and we could get more into the real estate investment side, some of the biggest deals I've ever done were from people that I met at the coffee shop, just from having a true, authentic conversation and building a relationship without expecting anything in return, but just by going out, meeting people and having good conversations every single day.
I love that. John, I want to get to your success, but before we get there, I love the 13th step, Mark. I think that's really good because it's kind of the 13th step. I think immediately when you said that, I was like, oh, that's always somebody's unique way of how they've, digested the 12 steps and what they've done with it. So I really love that. But then it got me to thinking, what was step 0? So step 0 or pre-1, because this is like the hardest part of everybody's journey. And I know whatever you're about to say, I know, because you also said something that I picked up on, John. You said you were in a meeting and you heard somebody, you're like, I heard my story. And I'm sure it wasn't exactly your story, but you heard your kind of similar story. And then you saw this person living a different life than you. What was for you, where was that? Because there are a lot of people struggling. Like what was that thing that really took you from 0 to step 1?
So for me, it was really, when I'm tremendously and forever grateful that my aunt took me into her home. And at that time, as I mentioned, I had no license, no job, nothing. So all day, every day, I'd just hang out with her. And that's actually where the bug for real estate started, where we would sit at the kitchen table and we'd be looking through Newsday and we would start looking at the real estate sections. And she would tell me stories about when she bought her house and how it increased in value. And then I would go for rides with her in our car. We would go to get groceries and she would just start talking to people randomly. And I saw that the way that she interacted with people, the way that people enjoyed the conversation, just that human interaction was something that I needed to feel or to see what was possible in life, right? Because I was probably just keeping to myself at the time, going through what I was going through. I wasn't out talking to a lot of people. I was either working in nightclubs, going to school, or sleeping. So for me, being around somebody that was out communicating with others, helping people, and just living a life of others and just offering rides to people without expecting anything in return. And just her heart, I feel like, was something that really motivated me, the way that she talked to people, and something that I aspired to be like. And that's probably part of what led me to wanting to become sober, right? Was to just live a better life. And it wasn't that I was living a bad life, but I was also just keeping to myself. So being around her kind of opened me up to the idea of just talking to people, get around more people, have conversations, get out and start helping people. So I feel like that was a big part of it for me personally.
I love the line, living a life for others.
Yeah.
That was a great line.
I love that.
A great line.
I know I heard in there too, like, I mean, some of the words you didn't say, but it painted a picture for me. Like the first thing I thought of, Aunt Lisa, like, showed a lot of grace, like, yeah, you can come to my home. And like, and so there's a lot of grace, a lot of love, but the interaction that you had, that you were saying how she was interacting with humanity and human relationships. I really, really love that. So it was really like an inspirational, like, I really love that life. And this very different from the life I'm leading right now. Which just goes to show too how powerful and impactful your life can be, no matter where it's at. Like, it can be really powerful to somebody looking on.
Right. And 2 things that I want to mention, you reminded me of something where she was living life by example, which inspires others, which is something else that I learned in the program, right? Because you never knew who's watching, right? So if you're out cutting people off and driving like a lunatic, like, you're in the program. So we always wanted to be a good example, number 1. But number 2, a big part of living with my Aunt Lisa was she also had a severely handicapped child who had cerebral palsy. So I gained this hypersensitivity and understanding of helping someone, right? They can't walk on their own, they can't talk, they can't eat on their own. And just seeing that firsthand just gave me a lot of gratitude and also empathy for those that are suffering and struggling in other ways, not just by addiction, but through disability as well.
That's very inspiring, especially because one of the things that seemed to be a reoccurring theme is you were the one who needed help.
Mm.
And yet what helped you was understanding the importance of helping others.
Mm.
You know?
Very well put, Mark.
Right.
That's powerful.
That
Right.
is powerful.
Yeah. Wow. And this whole point about human interaction, I like that you pointed out that you were doing everything on your own. And it's weird because, you know, like you said, you were working in clubs. I mean, at the end of the day, you were around people. And it's so interesting that sometimes we can be around a lot of people. And I think we've heard this before, right? You can really feel alone, right? And it's that idea of then how do you build those relationships, or how do you understand the importance of building that next relationship so you can go from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, and all the way from 12 to 13. Right? I think it's a step in between the numbers that's so important. And I like that you brought that up, Cathey. The steps in between the numbers. Or the steps in between the steps.
Right, yeah. Or the space in between the story, right? It's like all these things happen. So John, tell me, so I love this moment where you're sitting in your room and you're like crying tears of joy, and you got your first, property or real estate investment. Did it just become, so then how at that point, so now we're kind of talking about the transition point.
Sure.
How did you continue to fuel your how are you kind of still utilizing the pain to power what you would need to sustain to what you are now?
Sure. So let me pick up from that moment. So at that time, I was still working a full-time job in design. I was doing product design, packaging. I remember being in the cafeteria and just talking to friends about the purchase that I just made, the renovations that I was making. And one of my friends overheard me, and she's like, "Hey, John, my husband actually just read this book and went to a conference. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and I think you should read that book." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll read the book. I'll check it out." I didn't think much about it. And I read the book, and I was like, holy crap, I've been thinking about everything completely wrong. I learned that the property that I just bought, which was a condo, which is a great first investment, was actually a liability, because now I'm paying a mortgage, right? But if I lose my job or something happens, how am I going to continue to pay that mortgage? So what they recommend is, instead of buying liabilities, that we should go out and buy assets, which are rental properties, which could be flipping houses to buy rental properties, but buying real estate that was actually an asset that even if you lost your job, it would still produce income, right? To an extent, right? There's a lot more involved with it, but just kind of like surface level. And I was like, holy crap, I need to learn more about this. So then I found the Rich Dad Poor Dad conference. It was like a 1-day event. I went to it. Then they upsold me on a 3-day event, which I went to. And I learned so much in that 3-day event. I learned about how to wholesale properties, how to flip, the development, how to look for opportunities. This was in 2011. So it was when we were coming out of the whole foreclosure, the 2008 whole, subprime mortgage crisis and everything. And everyone was going crazy looking for foreclosures. So that became a focus of mine. And I said to myself, now I just spent all this time, I spent 5 years living in a garage to buy a liability, which now I have to go out and sell so I can go out and buy assets. And that kind of set up my next journey, where I ended up getting my real estate license, which you don't have to, but I wanted to. I want to learn more about the sales side of real estate, not just the investing side, but how the agents work. So I got my license, sold that condo, and then I went out and started buying houses to flip. And then that continued and snowballed and grew and grew and grew. But that was just a huge moment for me of really a mindset shift, going from how do I buy a primary residence to now how can I buy investment properties? And that was a big shift for me. So I think we could stop at that moment and talk about that mindset shift, right? Because I went through a whole nother breakthrough at that moment, and something that I think people should think about as well. How do you create this generational wealth?
I also, I couldn't help it. Sometimes you'll see Mark and I writing. We both do kind of the same thing. You're
Yeah.
talking and we're writing something. And sometimes it's not what you're saying. It's like what our brain is thinking. But when you were talking, John, I wrote down, are you living your life like a liability or like an asset? Because I thought it was another powerful analogy that you made. So if somebody was watching this right now and they were still at the pain point in their life, they don't have the 2020 vision you might have looking behind and how everything, they're just probably sitting there thinking, oh, my low bar goal is also to be at a job and to look respectable or whatever, things that you were saying. But a quick and easy question, is my life a liability right now? Am I living it like a liability or am I living it like an asset? And that made me think about how powerful that could actually be. Right? Because when you're an asset, you're giving to other people, you're valuable to other people. When you're living like a liability, you're taking from humanity, you're alive and living, but you're not producing any asset value, based things. So yeah, Mark, your face.
First of all, you know how much I love asking questions. So whenever I hear a question that's got me thinking, like I almost want to just break away and just like meditate on that question myself and then go through my own life journey. At what point did I feel that I was more of a liability than an asset to myself? And to think about those moments in life, or hopefully that moment in life when I made that switch, right? I love this, especially because we're talking about analogies today and metaphors. I love the fact that you are in real estate, that these are terms that are often very much related to real estate.
Yeah.
And yet, at the end of the day, while you can talk real estate like nobody can talk real estate, I know that because I've had conversations with you. The beauty of it is how in life so many things are a metaphor for life. That's really powerful. Are you living your life like a liability or an asset? And then, of course, I'm always into the how, like the process. I love that. But I love just sitting on that point for a second. So, John, just out of curiosity, how is that question kind of sitting in your head right now?
Really interesting, because it makes perfect sense that you asked that question when applying it to life, but I didn't think of it before. Now, whenever I enter any kind of investment or anytime that I spend money, I think about it in that way. Is spending this money going to bring value in the future, or is it just going to dwindle away? Whether it's doing marketing, whether it's buying an investment property, no matter what it is, I do try to run things through that filter, right? Especially when I'm looking at real estate, but let's use real estate as an example. If I'm looking at a house to buy, what is the highest and best use of that property, right? Is it just to live in and create a liability, or is it to maybe make it a second home, but not just a second home to where it's a liability, but maybe I'm going to use it 5 times a year, but then rent it out Airbnb for the rest of the year. That's one way to turn a liability into an asset. Is it a property that I can flip to create capital? Or is it something that I could rent out and keep for the rest of my life and then give to my son? So I really run everything through that filter. What is the highest and best use? And I kind of use real estate because that's really what I think about all day long. But I think that is a good analogy for me, is what is the highest and best use of this thing that we're talking about?
This is really such a decision-making tool. Yes, you talk real estate because that's what you live and breathe. I'm thinking back to my days working as an educator in a school, and your message just right now just made me think about an unfortunate incident where like I had to break up a fight. Like this was like a brawl. And if I could turn back the hands of time and take some of the wisdom from this conversation, I would love to teach I would have loved to have taught those young people, first of all, about the concept of liability and asset, and to get them to think about that moment. Because what I found as an educator in moments like that is people are working on instinct, like that, like they're right in the moment. Sometimes they're making the worst decisions in the moment of, right? And when you consider your story and your background, I'm sure you can relate. Like there are some really bad decisions we make in the moment. There are some real liability decisions that we make in the moment. And I almost wish that going back in time after teaching them this concept and getting them to think about what they want to do next. I want to get that kid, whatever. I want to do this. I want to do that. And they're all heated up. And they're not thinking about that decision and whether or not it's a liability or an asset. That's powerful. So I bring up the universality of this idea, and that's why it's resonating with me so much.
Well, John, you even took it further, right? Because you said if you were to take what you just said and add it to what Marc said, it would be what's the highest and best use of that situation? What's the best possible outcome, and what's the highest use of that situation? Like what? Yeah. I love the analogies between life and real estate. It's so it's so who you are. And I feel like part of this conversation, what I'm really loving, John, is just that because you are always thinking real estate now, and your mind is always thinking about liability, asset, generational wealth. I love that you mentioned, like, can I get this and rent it out for a long time and then pass it on to my son? Because that's even talking about assets that you pass on to your family, but also how you show up as an example is a huge asset. It's bigger than any asset that you could ever pass on, house or property or otherwise. So also the analogy back to who you are as a father, you're passing on assets to your family as well.
Sure. And something I thought of as you guys were speaking is the relationships we have, right? Because the relationships with whether it's friends or potential partners, it could actually be liabilities or assets, right? In some situations where people have asked me to invest in certain things, which I kind of didn't have a good feeling and I shied away from it, where I've seen them being indicted or getting into some sort of trouble because of things that they were doing that just were not on the up and up. So I think some of it is having intuition of knowing who and who not to do business with. But to look at it on the flip side, people could be an asset to you, and also you could be an asset to them as well. I think that as long as we're giving, and it's I do believe that the more we give, the more we get, and it becomes a cyclical process. Like if you're out there educating others, opportunities will come to you, right? So if you're out there doing the right thing, surrounding yourself with the right people, and really trying to use your intuition on whether or not it's, good to do business with certain people, I think that could really make or break your career. So.
Okay, not to go geeky on this, but look at this. So, because I don't want to go too far this way if you all don't want to, but you just blew my mind, John, because now you're actually talking about the balance of relationships. Are two people in any kind of relationship, could be a friend, business partner, could be just, casual acquaintance or whatever, but is one of the people is one of the people an asset and one of them is a liability? Like even within that relationship sphere itself, like can you look at all your relationships and go, God, am I the one that, are we both assets to each other? Are we both liabilities to each other? Is one an asset and one a liability? So I don't know. I started thinking about the balance even of relationships, right, Marc? Marc, I love looking at your faces. Like I would say with ease that Marc and I probably would both say, I don't want to speak for you, Marc, but that we would both look at our relationship and say, it's been nothing but asset for each other, So yeah, I just love that thought, the balance of relationships.
Yeah, you know what? I got to tell you, it's so funny. I think I lost my train of thought because I was so invested in what you were just saying. And it's funny that the two of you brought up relationships, because I think I was thinking about that a little bit earlier. And again, the universality of what you're talking about here. I guess what it made me wonder, and this goes a little bit deeper into the ideas, how do you even figure out like liability and asset, right? It's almost like saying, oh, this person is good for me, or, you know, this property is good for me. Like, what does good mean, right? When you think about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, one of my favorite stories in that book is about when he figured out selling comic books, and he was selling them and making money, you know, just like genius for a little kid. I'm sure somebody was like, don't bother me, kid, right? But at that moment, he figured out what you know, the difference between liability and asset. And it does make me wonder whether it's a relationship, whether it's business, whether it's real estate. Like, how do you even define what a liability or an asset is?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and John already kind of spoke to it a little bit, right, John? Because you said, I love when you said, like, you painted a clear picture in the real estate space, right? You said, I have this condo. It's a liability because I'm having to pay a mortgage on it if I lose my job. At that moment, obviously, you weren't renting it out. You were trying to renovate it. And so you were just paying money into it. And so it kind of made me think, is that relationship providing anything back? And that's what I was taking. Where there's joy or happiness, obviously it doesn't have to, it shouldn't be money. Let me, you know, preface that. But I think that, you know, because look at kids. I mean, if we were trying to get money out of kids, like we were trying to make that as an investment, it would be the worst, probably one of the worst investments ever, right? Because all we're doing is pouring money into it.
You're right. You're right.
But they are never a liability because of all the other things that they give us. And those are the things that we can count. Just the unconditional love, the connection that we have, the person that's walking around, that's a part of us, and, you know, this part of our family unit. So I don't know, my mind's just, I'm loving this so much because, John, I think you created something, and I never really get super excited about real estate, although I can totally respect what you're doing, but like real estate doesn't usually just excite me. But in the context of everything you're saying, I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. You know, I want to say one other thing too that I think is really exciting about it is it's also thinking about yourself, not only just your decisions, right? Or the other people in your life or the other things that you work with, but how might I be a liability or an asset to someone else, or even in my day-to-day decisions, right? Is this a liability decision or is this an asset decision?
I
You
like
know?
that, by the way, Mark. I don't know if you picked up on that, John. I like that. You said a liability decision, and now you added an asset decision. I like even down to the decision level.
Sure. And that's something I was actually just talking to a friend of mine about earlier, is how can you provide and over deliver value for your clients? Right. So I think if you take it through that kind of filter, and if you ask yourself those questions, am I being a liability or am I being an asset to this person? I think not only will you be doing the right thing, but you could also really set yourself up to really serve that person at the highest level possible. And you almost become just incredibly valuable, right? If you're creating value at that level for all your clients, they'll never work with anyone else.
I love that.
Yeah. And yet I'm sure, you know, because real estate people think sales, right? And you use the word, you know, when you were talking about going to the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that, you know, they upselled you, right? And yet I'm sure sometimes that's the mistake that people can make too, right? Like they're trying to get too much out of people. They're trying to make that extra dollar, or they're trying to get that extra date, or whatever the case may be. And sometimes when you kind of oversell it because you're trying to get more out of it, you think that you're pulling in an asset, but in actuality, you know, because you're asking too much, you're the liability. Man.
Mark's like, I'm tripping myself out over here.
I really am today. I really am. And I'm telling you, I have so many conversations with John. Like every time I walk away from a conversation, I just got more things to think about. And this one really is definitely at the top of the list. Because as I always talk about with everybody, I love going back to the dinner table and having conversations with the family about, you know, what was that liability decision you made today? What was that asset decision you made today? And again, just thinking about it from a parent perspective, you know, we're all parents here. You know, when our children are about to make some kind of decision, you know, my son's going to be applying for college in the next year or so, right? So those types of decisions, and he's at a club fair right now. Why is he at a club fair? Because he wasn't thinking about going to a club fair, but thinking about the type of club that you want to be in. Well, are you joining that club? That's really a liability decision to join that club. But joining this one is an asset-based decision. You know, so I'm just geeking out over the different ways that this can apply to people's lives. That's what makes an idea a great idea.
Absolutely. John, let me ask you this, because, you know, I would love to see you talking about this idea more. What do you think that would look like? What, you know, even based on what we've been talking about right now, like what, you know, what messages would you want to tell people? Like if you got the opportunity to speak on a stage or something and you were trying to sum this up, because I know it's hard to sum up. We're kind of having a conversation. What would you talk about?
Well, really, you know, I think it's really just finding ways to really help people and serve people at the highest level possible, and really just diving in and really just finding a way to solve problems, right? Because a big part of what I do as a real estate agent and a real estate investor is just solve problems, right? A lot of it's not even really about the real estate itself. It's about, you know, it's a people business. It's how can we get out there and serve people? So I think for those that are able to identify problems and come up with solutions pretty quickly and really help people, it's going to be the most valuable thing you could possibly do, regardless of the business you get into. But I think it would really be, you know, teaching people how to just build great relationships, expect nothing in return, and just find ways to solve problems.
I love that.
Because,
you know, go ahead. No, go
you know,
ahead.
because then you're just creating assets, right? You're not even getting into liabilities at that point.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the things I was thinking about asking you as well, but I think you already started to answer it, but I'm going to ask you anyways, because this is kind of like a big scenario question. If tomorrow you were to lose every single property that you ever had and you had nothing again, what would you build? What would you build upon? What would you say in your life that is left that you have that's very asset based? I think I already know the answer, but I'm gonna let you answer it anyway.
Yeah, it's really just the knowledge and the experience that I gained, and something that it wouldn't even worry me losing everything, because I know it could all be regained. And the way I would start is just getting out and talking to people every single day and building those relationships. Every major deal or every major opportunity that I ever received was through relationships and just helping people and just building on those relationships with expecting nothing in return. And that's the beautiful thing about real estate is, first of all, it's one of the oldest businesses in time, and people always need a place to live. And the way it transacts, or the way that the transactions happen may change, or the way technology happens may change, but people will always need a place to live. So if you're able to get out there, find opportunity and help people and build relationships, you will always be okay, as long as you're applying the right principles and you have the right education.
I like to take this even further, because that's your asset, right? And I think it's clear to say that so many people have their different assets. I want to bring this almost back to even beautiful again, right? Cathey, you just asked a question that John, when you get the opportunity to get in front of a crowd and to share this message, I think that the question that Cathey just asked is one hell of an opening question to get everybody thinking. Like, if you lost everything that you had, what is the one asset you would rely on? I don't remember exactly how you worded it, Cathey, but that was the gist of it. What I love about that question is, first of all, it gets people to think. Two, it highlights the beautiful again, right? Because even when I lose everything, there is still something, this one beautiful asset that I have that can help me to get everything back.
Yeah.
For John, it's your ability to form and build relationships, right? That's your rise right back to the top. For Cathey, the list goes on and on and on, Cathey. But that's another interesting game to play, Cathey.
It is, because I'm like, Marc, you've got a slew of them as well. Like it goes back to the things that make you who you are, or the thing or the value. John said something earlier that I really like, I couldn't help it, hit me in my soul. John, when you were talking about like, going through the 12 steps and you were like, well, you can't help other people get sober if you're cutting people off in traffic and being a jerk. And so it was kind of like, it really hit me in a different way. We hear that a lot, right? We hear like, lead by example or whatever, but you hit me in a different way with like, you can't be over here trying to help people and then over here trying to screw people over or trying to, be a jerk to people. So it's whatever the thing that's inside of you, that's your asset. It's the thing that you are, no matter where you're at. So for you, John, it's like wherever you go, you're in a coffee shop and then all of a sudden you meet somebody that you're now doing like a big business deal and you didn't know that person before, For Marc, it's his extreme positivity. Like you can't break Marc's positivity. I mean, that's one of many things, right? That I see, Marc, that you bring to the world as a huge asset. And an asset for yourself. Like, I could see you in a scenario where if you lost everything or if you lost something, like you would be able to just cling back onto your positivity and find a way.
And for you, Cathey, I agree that it's so many things, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is your insight and your creativity. Like no matter who comes around you, you could just listen, pick apart, and give them a nugget that they may have never thought of before. And you're like what do they say? The one who launches 1,000 ships. Like you're just launching 1,000 ships, and that's what's going to bring it back in return. So it's interesting. We've all got our assets, right? We've all got our beautiful again, and it's so important to think about. I love how that's the through line of everything. That one asset, man. Oof.
Yeah. John, let me ask you another question. Sorry, I'm so interested in everything, and I love how I'm sure you can talk about real estate all day long, but I love how this is really beautifully intertwining with your life and your relationships with people. If relationships are assets, like for you, what is that? Do you feel like, I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel like that's something that everybody needs? Is there another avenue, or is relationships really it? Because if that's it, then I think your idea is probably based better in that, like relationships are everything.
I think that's it. I think part of even the human experience for being on this planet is to enjoy each other, right? I feel like we're not just here to make money. I feel like we're here to enjoy the human experience. So to me, and I believe for anyone else, relationships are everything, right? They always say, I think it's not what you know, but who you know. So that's part of it as well. For someone that's just getting out of college that wants to get their first job, I think that if you're able to get out and build relationships, it's going to get you closer to where you want to be. I also just want to throw in one thing that I kind of thought of as part of that 12-step program, and part of the transformation process that I just wanted to mention was the reason we fill ourselves with these external things, whether it's, drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be, addiction in general, is because we have this void within us, right? This void that we need to fill to feel better, to forget about our problems or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. But the beautiful thing about the program is that you remove those problems root and branch, which is part of the reason for doing that going out and making amends, right? Because now you don't have the guilt and shame, but you're also filling it with beautiful things again. And part of that is the relationships that you build, right? It fulfills you, it gives you purpose. And when you have fulfillment and purpose, there's no stopping, right? So I feel like if you could remove the bad, put the good in, and just build those relationships, you will be unstoppable.
And you said, and I quote, building it with beautiful things again. That's
The beautiful thing, I can't.
It's the thing that we can't get away from today, right?
Exactly.
Mark, I want to ask you a question really quick, Mark. If we were coaching John right now to give a TED talk and we were like, oh, we started this conversation with like, there were a lot of painful things that John went through, but he used it as his power. But then we're starting to have this conversation. As a coach for him, would you veer him in a different direction for changing the idea up?
You mean like changing it from relationships or
to relationships or to, yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I wouldn't necessarily say I would steer you away from relationships, but I do think that.
Oh no, I meant the pain and the power, like, because that's where we started. You get your.
Oh no. As a matter of fact, the what's working for me right now is going back to that thought of if you lost everything, what would get you back, right? Because I think that then becomes a transition into I did lose everything. And John, for all intents and purposes, you lost everything. You felt lost. I mean, from losing your dad, and then everything else just snowballed and you lost everything. And it took this, and it's so funny because again, you were in this business of working parties and everything and surrounding yourself, but it took what had to be, believe it or not, an amazing relationship with your Aunt Lisa. And if you think about that story, which is such a sweet story, that never would have happened had you not built that relationship with her prior to going to her, right? And so if you ask everybody what they've lost and what would be that asset, and you talk to them about how you lost everything and how you went through the 12 steps, but ultimately what's the most important thing, maybe the 13th step or the steps or the spaces in between the steps, you then ultimately share that the secret for you, your greatest asset, has been relationships. And while that's probably true for everybody else on the planet, you also have an opportunity to push everybody to think that if by any chance your ability to build relationships is not your asset, I encourage you to think about what your asset could be. And then I think with that, you get everybody walking out of the room the same way you got them walking into the room, which is, what is my greatest asset?
Yeah. How do I take my biggest pain and turn it into my biggest power or something, right?
Yes. So I think I love that you asked that question, Cathey, because to me, it really helped to really structure the whole storyline.
Yeah, I wanted to hear what you thought about that. I love that. I love that. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, it's without those relationships, I would have nothing. But there was something that I wanted to mention as Marc was speaking, where every day I basically start from ground zero, right? So as a real estate agent, right, it's almost like we wake up jobless every single day. Every day we have to go out, we have to hunt, we need to find a new client, we need to find new business. So it's almost like we're starting over every single day. And that's something that a lot of agents go through, especially right now. The interest rates are high. It's a difficult time within the real estate sales world. Transactions are down about 30-40%. But if you're able to get out, right, as if you're starting over every single day, and if you have that same hunger and that same energy to get out and meet new people and build new relationships, you will build your business again every single day, and a business and a life beyond your wildest dreams.
Oh, hold on a second. You just took it to a whole nother level for me, because here I am in this conversation thinking about from step 0 to step 13 or step 100, whatever it may be. over the course of a long time period. But then you just drop this whole thing about this is a daily
Yeah, I love
daily
that.
process.
Right.
Oh man, that's genius. I love it.
John, every time you open your mouth, you're like adding like this, like another great concept. This is so good. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love that a lot because I think in many ways, it's not just in the real estate industry. I mean, everybody could probably in some way or another go, God, every time you wake up every morning, you are having to rebuild in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
And but it's very prevalent in real estate. I can understand. I mean, it's kind of like speakers, Mark. You know how like we coach sometimes people that speak like that are keynote speakers. And as a keynote speaker, you might go and speak to an audience of 10,000. And then the next day you're like, all right, well, I need another audience. Doesn't matter what you did yesterday. Doesn't matter how many people you spoke to. Doesn't matter how many people you inspired. You got to wake up again and go, okay, who's my next audience? Where am I going to find that? Oh my God, there's so many things that I've taken away from the conversation that we had, but I'm really curious to know, John, what's going through your head. Like we started in one spot, we said a lot of things, you said a lot of things. How has the idea transformed for you, or how, what are your thoughts?
Well, I love to hear the feedback that you guys had and the way you're able to compartmentalize what I said and really almost create like a bigger story out of it. These are all ideas that I have, and really it's just speaking from my experience, my strength, and my hope, and just really, how do we put this together to tell a bigger message, reach more people, and help more people? So that's something that I want to do and continue doing. And I've met some amazing people by just sharing my story, whether it's in person or in podcasts. So I know that the story in itself could inspire people and let people know that there's always a way out, a way to get better, a way to grow, and to get through addiction, alcoholism, or whatever they're struggling with. So really, it's about just figuring out how to continue putting the story together and how to get it in front of more people.
Well, I'm just going to go through my speaker coach geeky mind really quick. The thing that I really loved about what we talked about today is that some of the things that we said, like this whole concept of asset and liability, and whether that be down to the level of asset decision, liability decision, are you an asset in the relationship? Are you a liability in the relationship? Where you can take the asset and liability and kind of do it. I feel like it's a super powerful way to support the idea that you have. But I really see that's why, Mark, I asked you if you thought the idea changed, because sometimes when we're talking, John, we could go, you could change the whole idea to, are you an asset in your life? You could make that whole, but I didn't feel like that's where the heart of where you were coming from. But I did feel like there might be the one with the relationship. But then as Mark, you explained it, I was like, no, you can still lead with the idea of like, are you using your pain to power your purpose or something like that? And for you, it's relationships and showing up, and that's how. And so anyway, that's what I took away from it. Mark, maybe you could tell him what you took away from it. I mean, other than what you said, because I really like how you described his idea.
Well, then I will just piggyback off of the last mind-blowing nugget that I took from you, which is this is a daily process, and we all start from step 0 every day. When you wake up in the morning, you put your feet on the floor, that's step 0. Even if your relationship, you had a great day yesterday, you went on a date night and all kinds of wonderful things, this morning is a new morning, right? It's almost like sometimes we take things for granted, right? And then you got to wake up and remember today is a new day, and you're starting from 0, and you got to work your way up to 100. So I love the fact that this also became an idea about a daily approach to your life, and it's asset, and it's about building relationships. And by the time the sun sets, if you haven't done something to build upon that relationship, you'll be closer to 0 than you'll be to 100.
right?
Mm. Mm. Ooh, I love that, Mark. I love that. I love it. Yeah, right. John, tell us where, if, you know, people listening, people watching, people hearing your idea, it's blowing their mind, like, where's the best way they could find you?
I would say Instagram, because it's a purely visual journey and I love to
Mhm.
document what I'm doing every day. So look me up there. It's my name, John, John, dot McSherry, McSherry.
Mm, awesome. And for anybody watching, please check out John and watch his visual journey, because I'm sure it's a lot. I can't wait to go follow you and see what you're doing in visual stories, because I'm hearing them. Anybody that's watching the show and is thinking, Marc and Cathey really get down when they talk to people, and they really break things apart, and they really have awesome people on their show. Maybe that could be you. So check us out too. We have a website. It's about to go show. It's about to go down show.com. That's a mouthful. And today I feel like it went down with John. I love this idea. John, thank you for being on the show and sharing your journey. Thank you so much for sharing your vulnerabilities with us. I hope that anybody watching took John's story to heart. If you feel like you're out there and you're not doing well and you're lonely and maybe, you know, whatever, if you feel like life is caving in on you, I hope that John and his story will help to revitalize that tomorrow you can start at step 0 and it's a brand new day. It went down today. It will go down next time, and it will go down every time on It's About to Go Down.